Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are covering a war that the mainstream press wants to sanitize for you. US and Israeli forces have launched strikes across Iran, and the casualties are not military generals or weapons facilities. They are athletes. According to Middle East Eye, US-Israeli attacks have killed 4 taekwondo athletes in the city of Tabriz. For young people whose only crime was training for sport in a country that Washington decided to bomb. Let that sink in before we continue.
I'm Maya Clarity, and Alex, I want people to understand the weight of what you just said. These were not combatants. These were athletes, likely training at a sports facility in Tabriz, one of Iran's major cultural and athletic centers in the northwest of the country. When we talk about precision strikes, when Pentagon spokespeople use phrases like degrading military capability, this is the reality on the ground. 4 athletes dead. And the question nobody in Washington is being forced to answer is, what military objective did killing taekwondo athletes serve?
Absolutely none. And this is a pattern we've documented on this show repeatedly. The targeting calculus in these operations is not as surgical as they claim. Tabriz is a major population center, home to over 1.5 million people. When you drop ordnance on a city that size, you are making a choice to accept civilian casualties. The US military knows this. The Israeli military knows this. And yet the framing in Western media will be about strategic targets while 4 families are burying their children who were training for international competition, not building weapons.
And let's connect this to the broader question that Al Jazeera's analysis raises this week. Their opinion piece states plainly that this US-Israel war with Iran will not end with a clear victor. The assessment is that we are heading toward an arrangement where each side claims it achieved its core goals. That is diplomatic speak for a forever war with periodic escalation. Meanwhile, the people paying the price are Iranian civilians, athletes, families, not the decision-makers in Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran who orchestrate this violence from behind blast-proof walls.
That Al Jazeera analysis is critical because it strips away the victory narrative that both the US and Israeli governments are trying to sell their domestic audiences. The reality, according to analysts, is that Iran's military infrastructure is dispersed and hardened enough that you cannot deliver a knockout blow from the air. And Iran's retaliatory capabilities, while limited compared to the US arsenal, are sufficient to impose real costs. So what you get is not victory. You get an indefinite cycle of escalation. And in every cycle, it's civilians who absorb the damage.
Which brings us directly to our second story tonight. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer came out Thursday and, in his words, strongly condemned strikes, but not the US-Israeli strikes on Iran. No, he condemned Iran's strikes on a Qatar gas hub. Now let's unpack the selective outrage here. The UK government watches 4 athletes get killed in Tabriz and says nothing of that magnitude. But when energy infrastructure that affects British economic interests gets hit, suddenly Starmer finds his moral clarity. That tells you everything about whose lives matter in this calculus.
And Maya, let's be very specific about why Qatar matters so much to the UK. Qatar is one of the world's largest liquefied natural gas exporters. The UK has significant energy contracts tied to Qatari gas, especially after pivoting away from Russian energy following the Ukraine conflict. So when Starmer strongly condemns an attack on a Qatar gas hub, he's not making a humanitarian statement. He is protecting the British energy supply chain. That is the subtext that no anchor on the BBC is going to spell out for you. Follow the money, follow the gas pipelines, and you will understand every statement coming out of Downing Street.
And this is where the geopolitics gets truly cynical. Iran struck that Qatar gas facility as retaliation, as a way of saying, if you allow your territory and infrastructure to be used in a coalition against us, there will be consequences. Now, you can debate the legitimacy of that strategy, but what you cannot do is condemn Iran's retaliatory strikes while remaining silent on the strikes that provoked them. That is not diplomacy. That is propaganda, and Starmer is engaging in it while British taxpayers are kept in the dark about the full picture.
And let's talk about what this means for the Gulf states now. Qatar has tried to position itself as a neutral mediator in Middle Eastern conflicts for years. They hosted Taliban negotiations, they've been involved in hostage deals. But when your gas infrastructure becomes a target in a US-Iran confrontation, your neutrality is effectively dead. Iran is sending a message to every Gulf state, you cannot profit from both sides. You cannot sell gas to the West while the West uses your airspace and logistics to bomb us. That is the strategic reality that Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia now have to navigate.
And the second Al Jazeera piece we're covering tonight lays this out with devastating clarity. The analysis states that Iran's regional ambitions are increasingly constrained by military limits, economic pressure, and internal fragility. This is the other side of the coin. Iran is not operating from a position of strength here. Their proxy network has been degraded significantly. Hezbollah has been weakened. Their economy is under crushing sanctions. So when Iran strikes a gas hub in Qatar, it's not an act of confidence. It is an act of desperation by a regime that is running out of options.
And that desperation makes everything more dangerous, not less. A cornered state with ballistic missile capability and a population that is already suffering under sanctions has very little incentive to de-escalate. The analysis points to Iran's internal fragility, and that is code for the fact that the Iranian government faces domestic unrest. We saw the protests in 2022. The economic conditions have only worsened since then. So the regime in Tehran has a dual crisis: external military pressure from the US and Israel, and internal pressure from its own population. History tells us that governments in that position often escalate externally to justify internal repression.
Which is exactly what makes the US-Israeli strategy so reckless. You are not just bombing a country. You are destabilizing a state of 85 million people with nuclear ambitions and a network of regional allies who are wounded but not eliminated. The assumption in Washington seems to be that enough military pressure will force regime change or capitulation. But that assumption has failed in Iraq, it failed in Libya, it failed in Afghanistan. And the analysts at Al Jazeera are telling us it will fail here too. There will be no clear victor. Only victims.
Now let's pivot to our third story, because while the Middle East burns, the political establishment in the UK is waging a different kind of war. Nigel Farage, who now leads Reform UK, publicly attacked London Mayor Sadiq Khan for, and I want you to hear this clearly, praying in public. Farage accused Khan of attempting dominance over our culture by the act of praying. Let me say that again. A man prayed, and a political leader called it an act of cultural dominance. This is the state of political discourse in Britain in 2026.
And Alex, let's be precise about why this matters beyond the obvious bigotry. Sadiq Khan is the mayor of London, a city of 9 million people from virtually every cultural and religious background on earth. Public prayer is protected under UK law, under the European Convention on Human Rights, and under basic principles of religious freedom that Britain claims to champion globally. For Farage to frame a Muslim man's prayer as an act of dominance is not a policy disagreement. It is the deliberate weaponization of Islamophobia at a moment when British Muslims are already facing a spike in hate crimes tied to the Middle East conflict.
And the timing is not coincidental. Think about what we've discussed tonight. The UK is involved in a military confrontation with a Muslim-majority country. British media is saturated with images of Iranian missiles and rhetoric about threats from the Islamic Republic. And into that environment, Farage drops a statement designed to blur the line between Iranian geopolitics and British Muslims living peacefully in London. This is a textbook radicalization pipeline for the far right. You take a foreign conflict, you domesticate it, and you use it to target minority communities at home. Middle East Eye is right to flag this story because it is not just about Farage's comments. It is about the political infrastructure being built to scapegoat Muslims.
And let's talk about who benefits from this. Farage's Reform UK party has been gaining ground by positioning itself as the defender of so-called British cultural values. Every time he makes a statement like this, he is performing for a base that wants permission to view their Muslim neighbors as threats. Meanwhile, the conservative establishment, which has been hemorrhaging voters to reform, feels pressure to match that rhetoric rather than challenge it. So the entire political spectrum shifts rightward on questions of religious freedom, and the people who lose are British Muslims who are being told, in effect, that their faith is incompatible with public life.
And I want to draw a direct line between this story and the war coverage. When Keir Starmer condemns Iran strikes on Qatar but says nothing proportional about athletes being killed in Tabriz, and when Nigel Farage attacks a Muslim mayor for praying, these are not separate stories. They are expressions of the same hierarchy of human value. Iranian athletes' lives are worth less than a gas pipeline. A Muslim man's prayer is treated as a threat while a white politician's inflammatory rhetoric is treated as legitimate discourse. The common thread is that Muslim lives, Muslim bodies, and Muslim spiritual practices are consistently devalued in Western political culture.
And Middle East Eye deserves credit for covering this story because you will not see it framed this way on Sky News or the BBC. The mainstream framing will be Farage sparks controversy, as if this is just another political spat. It is not. It is a sitting political leader telling millions of British Muslims that the simple act of prayer makes them a cultural invader. In any other context, directed at any other group, this would be recognized immediately as hate speech. But because it targets Muslims at a moment when Islamophobia is politically useful, it gets laundered as free speech and cultural debate.
Let's zoom out now and look at the full picture across all 5 stories we've covered tonight. What emerges is a system. The US and Israel conduct military operations that kill civilians, including athletes in Tabriz. The UK government selectively condemns only the retaliatory strikes that threaten its energy interests. Analysts confirm that this war has no achievable endgame, that Iran is being cornered without any viable off-ramp. And simultaneously, politicians in the West use the conflict to justify domestic persecution of Muslim communities. This is not chaos. This is a machine operating exactly as designed.
And the machine is profitable. Every bomb dropped on Iran is a line item in a defense contractor's quarterly earnings. Every gas pipeline threatened is a futures trade on the energy market. Every Islamophobic statement from Farage is a fundraising email to reform UK's donor base. The war economy does not distinguish between the battlefield and the ballot box. It monetizes both. And until we start talking about war as an industry rather than a policy, we will never understand why it never ends. The Al Jazeera analysis is right, there will be no clear victor. Because victory would mean the machine stops, and the machine was never designed to stop.
And let's address the internal dynamics in Iran that the second Al Jazeera analysis highlights, because this is where the human cost is most acute. Iran's economy has been under sanctions for decades. The currency has collapsed. Inflation is devastating the middle class. And now on top of all of that, Iranian cities are being bombed. The analysis describes Iran's regional ambitions as constrained by military limits, economic pressure, and internal fragility. What that means in human terms is that 85 million people are caught between a government that cannot protect them and foreign powers that are actively attacking them. That is not a geopolitical abstraction. That is a humanitarian catastrophe.
And the proxy networks that Iran built over decades, Hezbollah in Lebanon, allied militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, these have been systematically degraded. Which means Iran's conventional deterrence has been weakened at exactly the moment it needs it most. So what options does Tehran have? They can capitulate, which the regime views as existential suicide. They can escalate conventionally, which risks even more devastating US retaliation. Or they can accelerate their nuclear program, which is the one card that changes the entire strategic equation. This is the most dangerous moment in this conflict, and Western leaders are sleepwalking through it.
That nuclear dimension is something the mainstream media has been criminally negligent in covering. If you bomb a country's conventional military infrastructure into rubble, you do not eliminate the threat. You incentivize that country to pursue the one-weapon system that guarantees deterrence. Every military strategist knows this. The lesson of Libya, where Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program and was subsequently overthrown and killed, is not lost on Tehran. The US-Israeli bombing campaign may be creating the exact outcome it claims to prevent. That is not speculation. That is strategic logic that any war college graduate can explain to you.
And while we're talking about what the media refuses to cover, let's talk about the athletes in Tabriz one more time. For taekwondo athletes. These are people who represented Iran in international competition, who trained for years, who embodied the kind of cultural exchange that is supposed to make war harder. The Olympic movement exists precisely on the principle that sport transcends political conflict. And these athletes were killed not on a battlefield but likely at a training facility. Where is the International Olympic Committee's statement? Where is the outrage from World Taekwondo? The silence from international sports bodies is complicity.
You're absolutely right, Maya. And let's name the double standard explicitly. When Russian athletes were banned from international competition over Ukraine, the sports world moved with remarkable speed. Federations, committees, sponsors, everyone lined up to take a stand. But when athletes from a country being bombed by the US and Israel are killed, the response is silence. Because the rules-based international order, as Western leaders love to call it, only applies when it serves Western interests. When those same rules would require condemning US or Israeli actions, they suddenly become complicated, nuanced, requiring more context. The hypocrisy is structural, not incidental.
And I want our audience to understand something about the information environment right now. These 5 stories we've covered tonight, the athletes killed in Tabriz, Starmer's selective condemnation, Farage's Islamophobia, the analysis showing no clear endgame, and Iran's internal fragility, these are all published today. They are all available. But if you turn on CNN or BBC right now, you will get a very different picture. You will get Pentagon briefings presented as objective truth. You will get retired generals analyzing strike coordinates without mentioning civilian casualties. You will get coverage of Farage that treats his bigotry as just another political opinion deserving of balanced coverage.
And that is the real war being fought right now, the war over narrative. The bombs falling on Tabriz are devastating, but equally devastating is the systematic effort to ensure that Western publics never see Iranians as fully human. When the only images you see of Iran are missile launches and nuclear facilities, you are being conditioned to accept any level of violence against that population. When 4 athletes die and it gets less coverage than a single gas pipeline, your empathy is being rationed by editors and producers who have decided which lives generate clicks and which lives are acceptable losses.
So let's talk about what you, our audience, can do. Because this show is not about despair. It is about clarity, and clarity demands action. First, diversify your news sources. Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera, and independent journalists on the ground are providing coverage that Western outlets will not. Read them. Share them. Fund them if you can. The reporting we've cited tonight exists because independent media exists. If we lose that, we lose the ability to see the full picture.
Second, contact your representatives. If you are in the UK, ask Keir Starmer directly why he condemns strikes on a gas hub but not the killing of athletes. If you are in the US, ask your congressperson to define the legal authorization for strikes on Iranian civilian areas. These are not rhetorical questions. They are accountability questions, and elected officials are obligated to answer them. Third, push back against the Islamophobia pipeline. When Farage or anyone else frames Muslim prayer as cultural dominance, name it for what it is. It is bigotry designed to dehumanize a community during wartime, and history teaches us exactly where that road leads.
And finally, refuse the narrative that this war is inevitable or that there are no alternatives. The Al Jazeera analysis tells us that the most likely outcome is a negotiated arrangement where each side claims victory. That means diplomacy is not only possible, it is probable. The question is how many more athletes, how many more civilians, how many more communities have to be destroyed before the adults in the room decide that the killing has generated enough political cover for them to sit down and talk. Every day of delay is a choice, and it is a choice that kills people.
This has been Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth. The stories we covered tonight are sourced from Middle East Eye and Al Jazeera, and we encourage you to read the full reporting yourself. We are not here to tell you what to think. We are here to show you what is being hidden. 4 athletes are dead in Tabriz. A prime minister protects pipelines over people. A politician calls prayer an act of war. And analysts confirm that none of this will produce a victor. The only question left is whether enough people will demand it stops before the next cycle of escalation makes that question irrelevant.
I'm Maya Clarity. Share this episode. Talk about these stories with the people around you. The most radical act in a propaganda war is simply telling the truth. We'll see you next time, and we'll keep digging. Because somebody has to. Good night.